What is up, everyone? Welcome back. We got another episode of the Fantasy Fellowship for you. We're going to be continuing our series, and today's video is what makes an RB1. We've already covered the quarterbacks and the tight ends. You guys can find that on my YouTube channel. I will have all this stuff published sometime soon on the fantasyfellowship.com. I just got to figure out how I want to format it. But if you haven't watched the other videos, what we're doing is we're kind of doing a data study, looking at last year's top 12. In this case, I do the top 13 just because, I don't know, I just wanted one extra bullet point there. And a lot of the 13s are very similar to the 12. So I just included that for one extra data set. And we're just examining the stats that were used last year to look at an RB1. And I did that with the other positions. But we're going to just jump right into it. And we're going to break it into pieces. So I'm asking the question, what makes a top 5 running back? That was Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson, Devon Achane last year. These guys were all fantastic. Josh Jacobs, technically, I mean, these guys were 0.8 points apart here. So basically the top 6 guys were all in their own tier by themselves. But we're looking at the numbers here, and let's look at the attempts first. Devon Achane, only 203 rushing attempts. Otherwise, 4 of these top 6 were over 300 rushing attempts. Jahmyr Gibbs is at 250, which seems to be a healthy amount. So the top 6 running backs, they averaged about 285 carries. So that's a threshold that we're going to want to examine as we go further in this. The more carries you have as a running back, usually the better you perform. And then I did go deeper a little bit on the running backs here, 2023 and 2022. So we're just going to talk about the 2024 numbers, and then I do have the averages up, from the last few years. So it looks like 285 carries gets you a threshold to get into the top 5 running backs. If we look at the yards, we have Saquon at 2,000, Derrick Henry at 1,900, but Jahmyr Gibbs, a little over 1,400, Bijan, a little over 1,400, Josh Jacobs, a little over 1,300, and then Devon Achane is really the outlier here at about 907. If I take that average, though, that's about 1,500 yards to qualify as a top 5 running back. Look at the touchdowns. Devon Achane, again, sinking really low here. So he did not really qualify as a rusher, which I find interesting. Everybody else, they're over 1,400, call it 1,400 yards as their floor. Only Jonathan Taylor went over 1,400 yards, by the way, below these guys. So we're developing some thresholds here. And then the touchdowns, again, Achane ran really cold on touchdowns. Everybody else was in the double digits, 13s, 14s, and 16s for touchdowns. So you need, just based on these averages last year, you needed 285 carries, 1,500 rushing yards, and 13 touchdowns to just crack the top 5 in fantasy. Now, if we go over to the receiving column, some backs showed that, hey, I don't need to catch the ball as much and be a top 5 running back. Those guys are Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, but those guys had to run for 2,000 yards to do it, which is interesting. So not a big receiving profile for these 2 guys, but the other guys, 52 catches for Jahmyr, 60 for Bijan, 78 for Devon Achane. That looks pretty good. That's going to bring that average to about 48 receptions, 57 targets, 401 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. So we kind of have some numbers here to go by. If I go all the way over here to this column, here's your top 5 running backs that I just highlighted. These are your top 5 running backs numbers for the last 3 seasons. So that numbers come down a little bit. Attempts, you need about 200, we'll call it 275 rushing attempts. Rushing yards, you need to be over 1,300. Touchdowns, you need to be in the double digits, we'll say. And you need over 55 catches. You need over 70 targets. You need over 400 receiving yards, and you need to catch at least 2, if not 3 receiving touchdowns. So there is your top 5 running back threshold. So if you're looking at numbers or projections and you think you got a guy that can do these numbers, it's looking pretty good. But keep in mind, just because Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry aren't going to meet the target numbers doesn't mean that they can't, carry the load with their rushing numbers. So you got to kind of balance it out just a little bit. Now, if we go on down to, let's look at the RBs 6 through 10. That's going to be Josh Jacobs, Kieran Williams, James Cook, Alvin Kamara, and Chase Brown. We're looking at this chunk right here. Now, look at only 2 of these guys went over 300 carries. The other guys were in the low 200s. Three of them went over 1,000 yards, but 1,009, 950, 990. I think 1,000 yards is kind of the goal. If I say 9,000 or 900 to 1,000 yards as your threshold, that should be fine. But Jacobs and Kieran Williams, these guys ran really well. They ran well enough to qualify for a top 5 season. They just didn't have enough receiving power to kind of boost them up in those numbers. But the touchdowns were there for these guys here, Jacobs, Williams, and James Cook. The touchdowns were not there for Chase Brown and Alvin Kamara. But Kamara here is the one outlier that sticks out amongst this group as the lead receiving back for his team. 68 catches, 89 targets, 543 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Chase Brown was also his team's lead receiving back. I'm curious. I mean, this is really only 75% of the year where Chase Brown was starting, so he could have finished much higher and changed some of these numbers here. But to be a top 6 to 10 back, you need at least 256 carries, a little over 1,100 rushing yards. You still needed double-digit touchdowns, and I think that's because these guys, Jacobs, Kieran, and James Cook, they really went over 10, 11 touchdowns last year. And then the receptions, you need about 45. You need about 55 targets, a little over 300 yards, and over 2 touchdowns. Now, if we go over to this chart again, and let's just examine, this is the last 3 years of data. You need minimum 240 carries. You need 1,100 rushing yards, almost 10 touchdowns. We'll go 9, 40. There's the 45 and the 60 targets, 333 yards, and a little over 2 touchdowns. So that's what we're looking at from a really strong, low-end RB1. And then if we finish off this chart stuff, we're looking at guys that were fringe running back ones. James Conner, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Taylor last year. Their numbers are interesting because these guys ran the ball better than the group ahead of them. The average rushing attempts for this group was 600 or 264. Above it was 256. So these guys got the ball more as a ball carrier. They ran for more yards, almost 100 more yards. Touchdowns weren't there for this group, though. Jacobs, Kieran, and James Cook, they hit the touchdowns, and that only averaged out to about 8 touchdowns for Conner, Jones, and Taylor. And then the receptions took another drop here, down to 38, 50 targets, a little over 300 receiving yards, and then barely 1.5 touchdowns here. So the rushing numbers look good. The receiving numbers were down. So what does that say about these guys? It says, hey, they're good running backs. They don't get used enough as a receiver. But, honestly, Jonathan Taylor probably brings this number down because I think Conner and Aaron Jones are both good receiving backs. And honestly, these guys kind of fit what you're looking for in a top 5 running back. They just didn't get there on volume. They didn't get there on yards. They didn't get there on rushing touchdowns. So these guys kind of profiled to me as late running back ones, and I think that makes sense seeing how they're used. Now, if we finish up here looking at running backs 11 through 13, again, we have another downtrending in all these stats except for the receptions. That's kind of interesting. But rushing attempts, they're down to about 235, just under 1,000 yards, about 7 touchdowns, 46 catches, and 58 targets. And then the yards actually spiked up a little bit here. So we have some good receiving profiles in this area. So now that we have kind of our thresholds here, let's see if we can figure out. I'm going to open up my projections, and we're just going to highlight and talk about some guys here. So with a top 5 running back, I'm looking for 275 carries, and we're going to say 240 carries for these other ones. So we're going to highlight some things and see if we can identify some players that meet some of these thresholds. And these are probably guys that we should be targeting because anybody with a running back 1 profile, probably worth drafting on our teams. So I'm going to go ahead and let's freeze up to column C. And I have this filtered right now, but okay. So I'm showing the top 18 or so backs. Let's go ahead and filter by projected rushing attempts. And I noted anything above 275 qualifies as a top 5 running back. So let's go ahead and make these guys, we'll make them bright green. Anything over 240 also qualified these guys as top running backs, but I'm going to lower that a little bit because we do see it go down to 235 in my projections here. So we're going to highlight this next group of guys that doesn't quite get the top 5 running back treatment, but hey, they qualify. They're going to get volume. They're going to be right there. Jahmyr Gibbs actually doesn't get the volume. Christian McCaffrey, like these guys aren't getting the volume there. So that's interesting. The Rushing yards here is we're going to call it 1,300, and then we'll drop down to about 1,100 here. 1,300 yards and up, we'll get bright green. And then we set about 1,100 here for these guys to be in orange. Just missing the cut, Lamarian Hampton, Christian McCaffrey, a couple other guys in here. I might have to adjust my Quinshon Judkins numbers based on him just being a knucklehead. I'll get to that eventually. Let's go ahead and look at the touchdowns real quick. Touchdowns, we're going to go, I'm going to say 12 and 9 for our thresholds here. So these guys will be elite. And then, yeah, we'll include all these guys here in the 9 category because that's pretty dang good. Let's look at the numbers for receiving real quick. We're going to go 55 catches, and then the next tier will be 45. We'll bright green these guys. I got Devon Achane leading the league in RB catches, McCaffrey, Bijan, Kamara, Chase Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Ashton Genty. These guys all qualified as potential top 5 receiving numbers. And then we go down to about 45. I'm going to include some of these 44s here because that's pretty much the same number. And then we get another group here, which gets us to about 15 backs there in the receiving numbers. Let's just take a peek at targets. I don't know if we really need to, but 70, we'll go 70 plus and 60 as our target ranges here. 70 plus will be bright green. And then we said 60 plus. I'm going to go down to 55 even. Those guys could be low-end RB1s if they get hot. I'm going to call it 450 for the receiving yards and about, they got 354. I'm going to go 325. So 450 and 325. So we only got 3 backs that are going to go over 450. Oh, did I got to probably filter that. There, we got one more back in there, Jahmyr Gibbs. And then we said 325. We'll go right there. That'll get us our spot. Okay. And then receiving touchdowns, it's all about 2. So I'm just going to highlight anybody that I'm projecting for more than 2. And we'll kind of just all put that here. We'll do these guys as bright green at the 4s and the 5s. And we'll highlight all the 2s here. Okay. So let's see how much green and orange we have filtered to the top. I just filtered now by PPR projections. Let's just zoom in a little bit here. So Devon Achane, well, first of all, Bijan Robinson's my running back 1. He is bright green, top 5 numbers in pretty much every category. I would argue he is probably the safest pick at running back this season because he's going to get there on rushing volume. He's going to get there on receiving volume, and that's what I want to chase. So I believed for Bijan Robinson to be the safest back. A lot of people were like, well, Saquon Barkley. But yeah, Saquon Barkley is going to get a lot of volume rushing, but we saw last year his receiving volume was not great. And I actually boosted his receiving volume compared to last year. He only caught 33 passes. I've got him up at 40 this year. So he's just not quite hitting these elite top 5 numbers. So I still think he qualifies as a top 5 back. We'll go ahead and we'll pencil him in here for bright green just because I think his rushing totals could just be insane. And we saw that with Derrick Henry last year too. Derrick Henry and Saquon, they just went nuts running the ball, and that's what got them to be top 3 running backs. But we like Bijan as the safest play across the board. He's got the most green check marks here. Now, Devon Achane, it kind of works the opposite way of your Barkleys and your Henrys last year, where his receiving numbers are so far insane ahead of everybody else's that he just needs modest rushing numbers to really separate himself. And we saw Devon Achane his rookie year, man. He racked up touchdowns. He racked up big plays. I like this Miami Dolphins offense. So because of his elite receiving profile, and I think he's guaranteed to lead the team in rushing touches, that qualifies him to me as a top 5 running back. I'm drafting a lot of Achane this season so far. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs, last year, he also didn't qualify on the volume. His 250 attempts were the lowest in the top, I guess, Achane too. He was one of the lowest in the top 12, but his rushing efficiency and his yardage output was insane. And it kind of does the same thing that I'm projecting here. So he does not profile as a top 5 runner, but he does have that profile of a top 5 receiver. So he's kind of the same thing as Jahmyr Gibbs. and perhaps just a more potent offense. So those are the top 4 running backs for me. Now, the one that I really struggle with is Christian McCaffrey. I don't think we're going to see him rack up a ton of volume. They're trying to make sure he lasts a while. So if he goes over 300 total touches this year, I'm going to be totally shocked. But I do think when you're drafting Christian McCaffrey, you're expecting him to be like a top 5 running back. And we do expect him to be one of the top receiving running backs in the league as well. So, we're gonna pencil him in there, but I'm gonna make him orange just because he's a little bit of an injury risk. Where I know Achan's a bit of an injury risk, but I like the receiving volume is too hard to ignore for me with Achan. I'm willing to overlook that and miss a couple games throughout the year. But we go to Ashton Genty next, who's not on a great team, but he's going to be one of those guys that meets the rushing requirements that we're looking for. He's over 300 rushing attempts. He's over 1,300 yards. He might be shy on touchdowns, but that might not matter. As long as he gets to 7 or 8, I think he's going to be fine. And then the true unknown is, what's his receiving workload going to be? Are they going to dick around and use another back in some third down spots, or can they just let Genty cook? So I'm going to put him right at the door. He's going to be another orange player for me as a guy that I really think could be a top 5 running back. And then after that, you got Bucky Irving and Jonathan Taylor here. Jonathan Taylor is going to crush it as a runner, but he's going to be really bad as a receiver. So if he surpasses these numbers that we have for him, and last year, I mean, he ran 300 times, 1,400 yards, 11 touchdowns, and he missed a couple games if I remember correctly. So if he runs hot, like kind of I'm projecting here, he could probably not do what Derrick Henry did, the 1,900 yards and 16 touchdowns. But man, if we get a little bit more on a Jonathan Taylor, and that pushes him into that 6 to 10 range, I think that's totally possible. So I don't think, because he doesn't have the receiving profile, I don't see him being a top 5 upside guy. He's clearly like RB 6 to 10 for me, and I think I feel safe with him in his rushing floor. Now, Bucky Irving's interesting because he was just under pretty much all of our thresholds here, like just under all of them, just a skosh. He's not going to get the crazy volume I think that requires him to be an elite top 5 rushing back, but he's going to be kind of like your Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, super efficient on the touches that he does get. But then he also has a really nice receiving profile, not quite as good as a Gibbs or an Achane, but when you click on Bucky Irving, you're getting a little bit of a discount on those players. And yeah, Bucky Irving's got top 5 upside every given week. I don't know, if it's going to land and he connects and everything is there top 5 for him. But I think for sure he lands in that 6 to 10 range for me. So I do like Bucky quite a bit. Josh Jacobs, he's going to check the boxes for a lot of the rushing upside, but the receiving volume is not as great as it could be. He's kind of like Saquon Barkley's receiving profile, but Barkley's going to get a little bit more burst and bigger plays out of it. So I think Jacobs clearly lands in that 6 to 10 range for me. And then our final couple guys here, Derrick Henry's lighting it up in the rushing department, but not the receiving department. So I think his numbers are coming down this year. We're going to put him in that 6 to 12 range. I think Breece Hall, really intriguing. I don't know how they're going to intermingle the other backs, but I think Breece Hall is kind of like a version of Bucky Irving. And you can get him 1 to 2 rounds later. I think the volume and everything's going to be very, very similar for Breece. The receiving numbers should be similar. And you're still going to have other backs working behind him, just like Rachaad White or Sean Tucker will be. So Breece Hall intrigues me. I think as long as Kieran Williams healthy, like he's a top 6 to 10 running back. I think he's a good click at ADP. And then a couple unknowns here. Omarion Hampton. Notice how Kenneth Walker didn't crack any of our top 5, top 10 numbers here. One, he doesn't stay healthy, and they don't really. I mean, they got Zach Charbonnet, man. They don't really want to give Walker as much as he can handle. So he's kind of like in that, that Aaron Jones, James Conner, those kind of tiers that really they want to get these guys the ball, but not too much. You know what I'm saying? But Hampton and Chase Brown are complete wild cards. I don't know what their rushing volume is going to be, but I am projecting them to be heavily involved as receivers. I think Tony Pollard's a guy that's going to be kind of the best of both. He's going to run. He's going to catch a lot of passes. Same thing with Aaron Jones. James Cook's a true question mark because they like Ray Davis. They like Ty Johnson. He might not be a guy that runs hot on touchdowns again like he did last year. Like those are definitely coming down, but I do think he is a potential top 12, top 13 back this year. I like Alvin Kamara quite a bit for his receiving role. I think that's going to offer him a really safe floor every week. but I think his rushing totals are going to come down a little bit. I don't want to say dramatically, but they're going to come down as he's just another year older. They brought in Devin Neal, they brought in they brought in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then our guy Kendre Miller's still there doing stuff. So that's a little bit concerning for Kamara's rushing output. But then I just have questions on, Joe Mixon, Dave Montgomery, like these guys, unless these guys run hot on touchdowns, and you can kind of see like that's the orange numbers for some of these guys. They have to run really hot on touchdowns to get there. But these are the green top 5 players that I'm kind of looking at. And then I like clicking on a lot of these orange guys. I'm even going to put Hampton, Chase Brown there in orange. I'm trying to get as many of these guys as I can in fantasy football this year. So we went over 20 minutes on this one. I'm sorry I didn't notice the comments in there. We'll answer these real quick. Good evening, Mr. Magic. Good evening, Charlene. And Shadow is Wicked. Good evening. I have a one-man keeper question. Are we keeping Kieran Williams to lose a round 8 or keep Brock Bowers to lose a round 10 TE slot in my league? Is also a TE wide receiver slot. Okay. I think you got to keep Brock Bowers, man. He's arguably the best player in his position. Kieran Williams, we like Kieran Williams, but I don't think he is a great running back by any means. Like, I don't consider him in the top 5 of my running backs as far as talent and fantasy outlooks. Now, he does look good when he's only back getting the touches, but they keep bringing in backs. Blake Corum, they brought in Jarquez Hunter. They keep trying stuff, but I have trouble seeing the dynasty outlook for a Kieran Williams, especially, next year. What's that going to look like for Kieran Williams? We don't know. But I'm pretty sure, hey, Brock Bowers, you're probably going to think about keeping him again next year. Because you have a TE/receiver slot, Brock Bowers' numbers were still just as good as probably any of those receivers that you would keep in that round anyway. So let me just pull that up real quick. Mr. Brock Bowers, he finished with 262 PPR points last year. He's going to catch more touchdowns this year. If he was a wide receiver, he would have been wide receiver 8. And, if we're comparing that, like Kieran Williams is probably running back 8 at best. So I think there's more value in keeping Brock Bowers, who's younger, who's got a more predictable workload and a more predictable locked-in future. And just, hammering tight end points, man. You got the best tight end. I think you take that positional advantage. We're going to be able to find another Kieran Williams type player, draft some of these running backs later and take a swing at it. So I know Kieran's probably been good to you, but you should probably cash in on Kieran Williams and go ahead and keep Mr. Brock Bowers. So thank you for the question. But I'm going to get out of here. This was a lot of fun. I have one more video to do as part of this series. That's going to be the wide receivers. I might get to that tomorrow night. I'm not quite sure yet. But I want to say thank you. Check out the quarterback and the tight end videos. And we'll see you guys Wednesday night. Peace. Got me feeling icy.